Most horror stories are loud. This one isn't. It's about real patterns reported by park rangers and search teams. Campsites found warm, organized, and recently used, with no one there. No signs of violence. No signs of struggle. Just people who stepped into the woods and never came back. The first campsite was discovered just after sunrise. A park ranger named Lewis noticed the smoke before anything else. It rose in a thin, steady column, pale against the early morning sky, the kind of smoke that meant a fire was still alive. That alone was enough to make him stop. Campfires were forbidden in that part of the forest, and overnight camping had been illegal there for almost a decade. Lewis stepped off the trail and into the clearing. Everything looked wrong in a way he couldn't immediately explain. A tent stood half assembled, poles threaded but not fully locked into place. A sleeping bag lay open on the ground, its lining still puffed with warmth. A backpack rested upright against a fallen log, positioned carefully instead of tossed aside. The fire crackled softly. There was no one around. Lewis called out, expecting a groggy camper to emerge, apologizing, scrambling for an excuse. His voice faded into the trees without an answer. Not even birds reacted. The forest felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down. Lewis approached the fire cautiously. A metal mug sat beside it, filled nearly to the brim with coffee. He hovered his hand above it, then touched the side. Warm. Not lukewarm. Not cold. Warm enough that whoever poured it couldn't have been gone long. Minutes, maybe less. Lewis felt the first flicker of unease tighten his chest. He scanned the clearing for signs of urgency. Dropped gear, torn fabric, disturbed earth. There was nothing. No panic. No struggle. Just absence. He circled slowly, boots crunching softly on pine needles, and that's when he noticed the footprints. Several sets. Different sizes. Different tread patterns. All of them led into the clearing. Lewis followed them to the tree line. They stopped. No overlapping exits. No scattered tracks leading away. Just an abrupt end, like the people had stepped off the ground entirely. Lewis radioed it in. While he waited for instructions, the forest seemed to press closer. He became acutely aware of every sound. The fire popping, his own breathing, the faint creak of trees swaying though there was no wind. He called out again, louder this time. Nothing. Then he heard movement beyond the trees. It wasn't fast. It wasn't heavy. It sounded like footsteps taken carefully, deliberately, by someone who wasn't lost and wasn't in a hurry. Lewis turned toward the sound. Hello. He called. The movement stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, stretched thin, like something waiting to see what he'd do next. Lewis didn't wait to find out. Later that morning, the campsite was logged as an illegal overnight stay. The official report suggested the campers fled when they heard a ranger approaching. It was a clean explanation, easy to file and forget. Lewis didn't forget. The fire had still been burning. The coffee had still been warm. And there had been no footprints leading away. 3 days later, another campsite was found. Different ranger. Different trail. Same details. Small blue diamond, chunk 5. This time, the clearing sat deeper in the forest. A tent stood upright, zip closed. Food sat neatly arranged on a portable table. A torch lay on the ground, switched off, its batteries still warm. No people. Again, the fire pit showed signs of recent use. Again, no animal interference. No scavenging. No insects. Again, footprints led into the site and stopped cold at the tree line. But this campsite had something new. All the tents faced inward. Not toward the trail. Not toward the fire. They faced the surrounding forest, as if whoever slept there wanted to watch the trees. By the end of the second week, there were 4 campsites. Rangers started talking quietly among themselves. Jokes were made during daylight hours, bad ones, forced ones, anything to keep the mood light. No one volunteered for solo patrols anymore. Trail cameras were installed near the clearings, but the footage revealed nothing useful. Hours of stillness. No arrivals. No departures. Sometimes, audio picked up faint sounds that didn't match the image. Murmurs, movement, a low hum that technicians dismissed as interference. The 5th campsite belonged to a young couple. Their car was still parked at the trailhead. Keys still inside. Search teams were brought in. Dogs refused to track beyond the campsites. One handler reported her dog freezing at the tree line, ears flattened, tail tucked so tightly it trembled. She had to carry it back to the trail. Thermal drones found nothing. No heat signatures. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Investigators noted how carefully everything had been left behind. Phones charged. Wallets untouched. Shoes placed side by side near tents, as if the owners had stepped out briefly and planned to return. They never did. Lewis couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, about how they ended. He requested permission to run an overnight observation near one of the newest clearings. Officially, it was to deter illegal campers. Unofficially, it was because no one else would do it. He parked his truck just beyond the trees and waited. The forest changed after dark. Sounds carried farther. Shadows stretched in unnatural ways. Lewis sat with his engine off, radio silent, watching the clearing through binoculars. At 12:17 a.m., he heard voices. They sounded normal. That was the worst part. 2 voices, maybe 3, speaking calmly, pausing, laughing softly. The cadence of people who knew each other well. Lewis couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm. He scanned the clearing. It was empty. The voices drifted from just beyond the tree line. Lewis stepped out of his truck despite every instinct screaming not to. The moment his boot touched the ground, the voices stopped. Then one voice spoke clearly, from close enough that Lewis felt it in his chest. "We see you." Lewis ran. He didn't look back. He didn't think. He ran until his lungs burned and his hand shook too badly to hold his keys. The next morning, his truck was found parked exactly where he'd left it. His gear lay arranged neatly at the edge of the clearing. Radio, torch, notebook, placed carefully. Lewis never returned home. He was never found. Lewis's disappearance changed how the situation was handled. The forest was officially closed to the public within 48 hours. Gates went up at trailheads. Notices were posted citing unstable terrain and wildlife risks. Press statements avoided mentioning missing people altogether. Behind the scenes, panic settled in. Senior rangers reviewed years of reports, looking for patterns they might have missed. Disappearances that had once been written off as accidents suddenly looked different when placed side by side. Hikers vanishing without distress calls. Campsites found undisturbed. Trails that simply ended. One older ranger quietly resigned the same week. He left behind a handwritten note that read, "It's happening again." Search and rescue teams pushed deeper despite orders to stay near the perimeter. They found another campsite. This one was worse. 3 tents stood in a loose circle. Inside one, a journal lay open on a sleeping mat. The last entry wasn't a sentence. It was a list. Names. Each name was crossed out except the last. Beneath it, written shakily, were the words, "They sound like us." The team leader ordered an immediate withdrawal. That night, trail cameras near the site captured something new. Movement. The footage was reviewed frame by frame. Nothing appeared visually. The clearing remained empty from dusk until dawn. But the audio told a different story. Soft speech. Overlapping voices. Familiar tones repeating common phrases. "Did you hear that? Come look at this. I think it's over here." At one point, a voice clearly laughed. It sounded human. The timestamp showed the voices looping in short intervals, repeating phrases out of order, as if testing them. Like something practicing. A former hiker came forward anonymously after the closure. He claimed he'd camped near one of the clearings years earlier. He hadn't gone missing, only because he'd ignored what he heard. Around 2 a.m., voices began calling his name from beyond his tent. They sounded exactly like his friends, using inside jokes, asking him to come help with something. He stayed inside, frozen, until morning. When he finally emerged, the neighboring campsite was gone. No tents. No gear. Just flattened grass and footprints leading into the trees. None leading out. Investigators began to theorize that whatever was in the forest wasn't hunting. It was observing. Learning patterns. Mimicking behavior. Recreating campsites the way it had seen humans use them. The camps weren't abandoned. They were replicas. Set up as invitations. The voices weren't meant to scare. They were meant to sound familiar enough to trust. Another ranger disappeared 2 weeks later. This time, the Forest Service didn't announce it at all. His patrol log ended mid-sentence. His last GPS ping came from a clearing that no longer existed when teams arrived. No ash, no tent impressions, no tracks. It was as if the campsite had been erased. Only one thing remained: a boot print facing the trees, perfectly preserved. Another ranger disappeared 2 weeks later. This time, the Forest Service didn't announce it at all. His patrol log ended mid-sentence. His last GPS ping came from a clearing that no longer existed when teams arrived. No ash, no tent impressions, no tracks. It was as if the campsite had been erased. Locals began reporting strange things near the forest boundary. Campfire smells with no source. Voices carrying on the wind, calling names that belonged to no one nearby. People waking at night convinced someone was standing just beyond their windows, waiting. The forest itself remained silent. No birds, no insects, as if it were listening instead. A leaked internal memo summed it up bluntly. Do not respond to voices. Do not follow sound. Do not approach campsites that appear recently used. If a fire is warm, leave immediately. The memo ended with one final line. If you hear yourself being called, you are already too close. Years passed. The forest reopened under strict regulations. No overnight camping. Limited access. Heavy monitoring. No more campsites were found. But hikers still vanished near the perimeter. Always alone. Always quietly. Occasionally, rangers reported finding clearings that felt prepared. Fire pits rebuilt. Stones arranged neatly. Waiting. Today, there are rumors among experienced hikers. They say the forest doesn't take people by force. It waits for imitation to be convincing enough, for the voice to sound right, for the campsite to look familiar. And when someone finally steps into the trees to investigate, the forest learns a little more about how to keep them. The final documented incident occurred on an overcast afternoon in early autumn. 2 experienced hikers ignored the perimeter signs and entered the forest through an old maintenance trail. They carried a satellite phone, emergency rations, and enough equipment to survive several nights if needed. They were reported missing when they failed to check in that evening. Search teams reached the area by morning. They found a campsite less than half a mile from the boundary. It looked newly assembled. Too newly assembled. The tent fabric was clean. Stakes were driven evenly into the soil. A fire pit had been built with careful symmetry, stones placed as if by someone copying a picture rather than relying on instinct. Inside the tent were 2 sleeping bags. Neither had been used. Food supplies sat unopened. A notebook lay beside them, empty except for one sentence written on the first page. It's learning faster now. There were no footprints. Not in. Not out. That campsite was dismantled immediately. Every item was removed, catalogued, and taken away for analysis. Rangers burned what they couldn't transport. Soil samples were taken. Trees were marked. Within a week, a new clearing appeared less than a mile away. Another campsite. Another imitation. It wasn't exact, but it was closer than before. Better arranged. More believable. A theory emerged among a small group of senior staff. They believed the forest wasn't a location. It was a boundary. Something within it mirrored behavior the way a predator mimics distress calls. But instead of hunger, it responded to attention. Campsites weren't bait. They were conversations. Each disappearance taught it how to speak more convincingly. One researcher proposed a test. They staged a campsite deliberately wrong. Food scattered. Tent crooked. Fire pit half-built. Human error exaggerated. Hidden cameras recorded everything. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the 3rd night, the campsite changed. The tent straightened. Food was gathered into piles. The fire pit was rebuilt properly. No movement appeared on camera. Only results. At dawn, a single new object sat beside the fire pit. A metal mug. Still warm. The test was shut down immediately. All footage was classified. After that, no one tried to interact again. The forest was quietly removed from public maps. Trails were erased from digital databases. Satellite imagery blurred the region slightly, labeled as protected land. Officially, it no longer existed as a destination. Unofficially, rangers still patrolled the edges. They listened. They waited. Occasionally, someone new was assigned to the region. They were warned carefully. Never follow voices. Never investigate campsites alone. Never stay after dark. Most followed the rules. A few didn't last long. Those were the ones who believed curiosity made them immune. One retired ranger gave an interview years later, off the record. He said the forest didn't feel evil. It felt patient, like something practicing a language it had almost mastered. Every campsite it builds, he said, is a sentence. And sooner or later, he added, it's going to finish one. Today, hikers still swap stories online. About voices in the trees. About campsites that look recently used. About places that feel prepared for them. Most people laugh it off. They shouldn't. Because the forest doesn't need everyone to listen. Just one person at a time. If you ever find a campsite deep in the woods that feels too neat, if the fire is warm, if the tents face the trees, leave. Do not call out. Do not answer voices that know your name. Because whatever is learning out there is listening right now. Stories like this are easy to dismiss. It's comforting to believe disappearances always have clean explanations. Wrong turns, bad weather, human error. And most of the time, that's true. But every year, there are cases that don't line up. Cases where people vanish without distress calls. Where their belongings are found exactly where they left them. Where search teams walk the same ground over and over and find nothing new. Those cases rarely make the news. They're filed away. Simplified. Forgotten. But the people who work them never really forget. Because once you've stood in a clearing that feels wrong, once you've seen a fire still warm with no one around, once you've heard a voice that sounds familiar calling from somewhere it shouldn't, you don't unhear that. You don't forget how quiet everything becomes. If nothing else, stories like this serve as a reminder that not every danger announces itself loudly. Some things don't chase. They don't rush. They wait. They let curiosity do the work. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you enjoy slow burn, long-form horror stories based on real patterns and reported encounters, consider subscribing. New stories like this take time to research and write, and your support genuinely helps the channel grow. Feel free to leave a comment with what unsettled you most, or share a story you've heard that still sticks with you. And if you ever find yourself deep in the woods, and you hear your name being called from the trees, remember this story, and don't answer.